Hello students! So whether you're watching this as your review or because you've missed the first 3 weeks of class, we will be in our level 2 book, and I'll be going quickly to review weeks 1 through 3 for you. It is your job to pause the video, write down questions you have, do any of the worksheets you may want to. So let's get started. Okay. Friends, food, family, weeks 1 through 3. All right. So week 1, we talked about discussing food. So the first thing we talked about was words of frequency. You can see them listed on your screen. You can also see them on page 7 with a bit of an explanation. I want you to be able to identify these words in a sentence, right? Where is the frequency word in these example sentences? And use them in your own sentences, right? So some examples: I never have ice cream for breakfast. Wink. Right? I always have coffee. I sometimes put sugar and cream in my coffee, right? Sometimes, always, rarely, never, etc. Sometimes you will hear these called adverbs of frequency. Again, you should be able to use these. Look at these questions, discuss them if you have someone to discuss them with. Practice using these words in your answers, right? If you don't have someone to discuss them with, write sentences. Moving on. Next, we talked about vocabulary about diets. Now, some of you might be familiar with the word diet in the context of you're getting too fat, you need to go on a diet, no sugar diet. More generally, the word diet means everything you eat. There can be a specific type of diet, right? Like a low sugar diet, a vegetarian diet. But later we will compare and contrast two people's diets, right? Everything they eat. So just keep that in mind. And then also look at these vocabulary words on page 8. I want you to be able to use them in sentences, okay? We also talked about what parts of speech each one is. So we talked about 3 parts of speech in week 1. We talked about nouns, verbs, adjectives. I believe I have a slide about them. So, parts of speech. We talked about nouns, right? Person, place, thing, idea, right? A person could be the president, or it could be someone, like, oh, my neighbor Maria, my brother Joe. So Pennsylvania is the place example. Give me your own examples. Place could be grocery store, place could be Harrisburg, more places. Things are for items, and then ideas like freedom or love, these are nouns that you cannot see or touch. Well, arguably you could see them, but they are still nouns. A subtype of noun is pronouns. They take the place of nouns in sentences. You should be familiar with these because we use them when we talk about verbs many times. So, just a reminder, he is for men, she is for women, it is for items and things, right? Like, it is sunny, the weather is sunny. So, moving on, verbs are actions or states of being. Example, run, jump, fly, sleep. These are actions, states of being. Just I am, right? I am, right? I am Amy, I am from China, I am happy, right? So, being able to use those verbs correctly with the right pronoun or subject. Last, we talked about adjectives. These are simply words that describe nouns, right? The small cat. What kind of cat? The small cat. We will talk more about these in week 3. So zipping right along, that's not the right one. Come on. Okay, this one is an important grammar point. We learned 3 ways to make questions. Again, 3 ways to make questions. First is inversion. I am happy. That's a statement. How do we make it a question? Oh, we say, am I happy? Notice where the subject is versus where the verb is, right? So that's why it's important to know which is the subject, which is the verb in the sentence. So, inversion, you flip the subject and the verb. So another way we practiced questions, and you can see this on page 9, the bottom. We have to know the verb do and does. So, stop it. Do and does. We would add do or does depending on the subject to the beginning of a sentence to make it a yes or no question. Right? Do you like soda? Yes. Do you like potato chips? No. So practice making different types of these questions. And the last way to make questions that we talked about that I want you to know, we actually wrote these on our page 3 on our notes. There are 9 WH questions that either begin with W or H or WH. So I want you to be able to use all of these in a sentence, but also be able to answer them with the correct type of information, right? When asks about time, who asks about people, where asks about location. So there will be links down below for you to find out more about these if you don't already know. So here's a list of them again, written more neatly so you can read it. And here are the video links. All right, moving on. We did reading and comparing diets. So on page 11, we read about a man named Ali and his diet. Remember, a diet is everything you eat in general, in this case. So what helped me was going through and circling the food that Ali talks about, right? He eats beans, vegetables, meat, chicken, rice, some beef. Next, we go to page 14. Answer question. Read about Christina. Read about her diet. What does she eat? We see cereal, donuts, soda, McDonald's, tacos, right? So looking at all of these foods, all of Christina's food, all of Ali's food, who has a healthier diet? Who is more healthy, right? So this is practicing reading for information, because it's one thing to be able to read, it's another thing to be able to remember and think about what we read. So we want to answer this question is the main question. Who do you think has a healthier diet? If you can answer all the rest of them, that would be great. You can also practice more reading comprehension on page 15. Right? So if you do these worksheets and want me to look at it, take a picture, send it to me on WhatsApp. I will give you feedback. Okay? This is a good way to learn if you can't be in class. All right, moving on to week 2. We talk about working with food. Week 2, working with food. So the first thing we do on page 20 and 21 is talk about different types of verbs we use with food. So you can read them here with me, just in case some of the pictures are confusing, right? We have boil, heat, taste, stir, serve, bake, add, grill, roll, fry, chop, and mix. These are our verbs. We are going to minimize that, so maybe she'll stop texting me. All right. Be familiar with the verbs, be able to use them in sentences with different subjects, right? I cook, you cook, he, she, it cooks. All right, next we talked about articles. This is another part of grammar. These are words that go in front of nouns that tell us a bit more about them. So we have a, an, and the. There is a QR code that you can scan. Watch a video about articles. I will also put a link in the description. So, when do we use a? When do we use an? When do we use the? So it's important to know what vowels are in English. A, E, I, O, U, sometimes Y, very sometimes W, right? But these are the ones we want to worry about. So, all of these should be answered in that video, all of the other questions. Moving on. Next, we talked about sequence. This is page 23. This is the order of events. So, right, an example that would be good to practice, talk about describing your day. Sorry about that. Okay. Practice describing your day with sequence words. First, I wake up. Then, I eat breakfast. After that, I take a shower and brush my teeth. Right? So, first, second, third, fourth, or you could also say first or next, then, after that. So, right, some people call these transition words. So you can practice with these recipes, right? What step is first? What step is second? What step is next? What step is last? Some of these have multiple answers. So you can practice writing instructions at the bottom of page 23. So this is good to practice the cooking verbs from pages 20 and 21. It's also good to practice just instructions. So, moving on in week 2, a big thing we talked about was advantages and disadvantages. Oh, there's some extra vocabulary at the top to prepare us for the big long story that you will also read. But advantages and disadvantages, right? So what are the good things? What are the bad things? Specifically, this is question 3 and question 4. Advantages and disadvantages. In this case, what are the good things about being a manager? What are the bad things about being a manager? Think of it, maybe you want to convince me. Say, Amy, you should be a manager. Look at all the advantages. Look at all the good things. You get more money. You get to be in charge. You, I don't know, maybe have a fancy name tag, right? You get to be cool. Advantages. Why would I want to do this? Disadvantages, maybe I say, I don't want to be a manager. It's too stressful. I have to make decisions, and that sounds scary, right? Disadvantage, I work more hours. So advantages, disadvantages. So be thinking about that. We'll come back to that throughout our units because it's good to be able to organize your thoughts from multiple different perspectives. Next, read the story. Look for vocabulary words, look for transition words, and answer the questions on the next page, page 26, right? So an important thing is to remember answering in full sentences, right? It may seem silly or tedious or repetitive, right? Which employees have a lot of experience? I don't know, maybe Tim and Bob have a lot of experience, but I can't just write Tim and Bob. That is not a full sentence. That is just a subject. Tim and Bob, they, right? I would say Tim and Bob have a lot of experience. That is the full sentence. So you'll notice that a lot of the full sentence that you will use is already in the question. Writing this whole thing out helps us identify more parts of a sentence, right? Subject, verb, object, different what we call clauses. So this is a good habit to improve writing and reading. So moving on, we have a long sequence activity, right? Who does what first? Look at the story for your information, okay? We don't have to do this part. And then on page 27, more practice. More practice with articles referring to the story. And on page 28, we also practice with reading an advertisement for a job. There's a lot of information that employers have to fit in one small advertisement, right? Employers versus you, the employee who works for them or would work for them. All right, and then moving on to week 3. Again, I know I'm moving fast. This is the point of review. So, week 3, we were talking about family and personality. So, let's fast forward through here. Okay. Again, advantages, disadvantages, story comprehension. Week 3, family and personality. So, we learned about 14 different family members, 14 words for family members. And then on top of that, we also talked about uncles, aunts, cousins, stepmother, stepfather, stepbrother or sister, and cousins. Also in-laws, right? My husband His mother is my mother-in-law. My husband, his father, is my father-in-law. My husband's sister is my sister-in-law, right? Related through marriage. So that's that. Lots of family members and lots of ways to talk about our family members. Tell me about your grandma. What is she like? So here we practiced using clues, context clues, right? My grandma is really what? We don't know, right? We have to fill in the blank. Oh, well, here's a hint. She always makes people laugh, right? So, oh, that must mean funny, right? Making people laugh. Someone is funny. So we did that for all of these words. And then we talked about, that actually brings us up to where we are, but we will also practice with simple past tense, both regular and irregular. There is a resource for the school system that I will post a link to, right? What do schools in the United States look like? Some extra vocabulary that help us understand this story, right? So we will also read this story. It's really long, so look for past tense verbs, look for present tense verbs, and let's see. We will also answer some questions together, right? So this was some of our homework. How long have you lived in the United States? Do you ever feel homesick? You may have to look this word up. Another question about advantages and disadvantages, and some self-reflection, thinking about yourself and your life. How have you changed since you moved to the United States? How have you changed, right? So think about that. Practice writing some sentences using past tense, maybe some personality words. And then the last thing I want to talk about, on page 39, we have some reading comprehension, right? So these are questions that you for sure can find an answer to in the reading. These questions have a right answer. You know, like, who is the son? He has a name. You can't just make it up. And then we also have a discussion question. This is an opinion question. Do you think she was right or wrong? And tell me the reasons. Why? Why do you think what you do? And maybe advice. Well, what should she do instead? These are opinion questions. These are opinion questions, right? There's not a right answer. There's not a wrong answer. So because of that, because there's no right or wrong necessarily, it's important to answer why you think so, or why you don't think so. So again, comprehension questions that have a correct answer, and opinion questions that do not have a right answer. All right, so this is weeks 1 through 3. All right, family members, personality words. All right, past tense. Oh, I should talk about past tense quickly. So regular past tense verbs are anything that end in a variation of ed, right? I needed to go to the grocery store. I wanted to eat ice cream. And then there are common irregular past tense verbs that just mean they don't add ed to a root word, right? So that would look like, if go, the verb to go, if that were regular, it would look like goed. But that is not a word. We use went. That's what makes it irregular. So learning a little bit about those, school systems, okay, comprehension. So here's a summary of what you should be able to do. Week 1, there are 5 frequency words. Use the diet vocabulary. Just define and give examples of nouns, verbs, adjectives. Make questions in 3 different ways and with 9 different question words. And then you also practice reading and comparing, right? In this case, it was the diets of Ali and Christina. Week 2, you learned 12 cooking verbs. You learned when to use 3 articles. You also learned about sequence and order of events. We could write of events. We practiced advantages and disadvantages, more reading comprehension, and a little bit about a job advertisement. Then week 3, finally, we talked about family members. We learned 14 words. Describing people, we learned 11 words. Talking about regular and irregular past tense verbs. We learned a little bit about the school system. Again, there's a video in the description. Discussion and some self-reflection questions, right? How have you changed since you came to the United States? And then we briefly talked about the difference between comprehension questions with one right answer that you can find in the story, right? Why we practice reading for information, and then opinion questions, right? So what do you think? Why or why not? All right, so that is weeks 1 through 3.